In 1935, a country changed its name. Persia became Iran, and for decades, that story was told as a diplomatic gesture, an administrative decision, almost a formality. It wasn't. What happened between 1905 and 1935 was not a transition. It was a collapse, a slow, violent unraveling of an order that had lasted centuries, followed by the forced construction of something entirely different upon its ruins, and the new name was the final piece of a puzzle that had begun to take shape 30 years earlier amid uprisings, foreign occupations, military coups, and a parliament fighting to exist while two empires decided the country's future in secret agreements in St. Petersburg and London. The real question is not why Persia changed its name. The real question is, what must die for a new state to be born, and who decides that? You are about to understand how an exhausted empire, divided between foreign powers and rotting from within, was transformed into a modern nation-state. Not by choice, but by the necessity of survival, and why the model that emerged from that process still shapes what happens in the Middle East today. To understand what broke, we first need to see what existed. The Qajar Empire had governed Persia since 1789. On paper, it was an empire. In practice, it was an arrangement of tensions held in place by tradition, by fear, and by a bureaucracy that ran more on inertia than design. The Shah governed from Tehran, but Tehran was an island. Beyond it, Persian territory was a mosaic of armed tribes, the Qashqai in the south, the Bakhtiari in the center, the Kurds in the northwest, each with their own leaders, their own armies, their own loyalties. The central state did not control them, it negotiated with them, sometimes bought them, sometimes feared them. The economy was the portrait of a state that had lost control of itself. Imperial finances depended on foreign loans, concessions over tobacco, oil, roads, and telegraph lines had been sold to British and Russian companies in exchange for immediate cash to fund the lifestyle of the court in Tehran. Shah Nasser al-Din had sold the British government the complete monopoly over the production, sale, and export of Persian tobacco. Every cigarette smoked by a Persian generated profit in London, and two empires were watching all of this with surgical attention. Russia wanted access to the Persian Gulf and control over the northern border. Britain wanted to protect the route to India and secure the oil beginning to surface in southwestern Persia. Neither wanted to destroy Persia. It was far more useful to keep it weak, dependent, and open. It was a balance. Precarious, humiliating, but a balance. In 1905, that balance began to crack. Merchants, intellectuals, mid-level clerics, and activists who had watched constitutional reforms unfold in Japan and the Ottoman Empire asked a simple question: why does the Shah govern without limits while the country dissolves? The answer went into the streets, then into parliament. The constitutional revolution demanded a constitution, an elected assembly, a state bound by rules. Shah Muzaffar al-Din, ill and without the energy to resist, signed. For one brief moment, very brief, it seemed Persia had found a path. It hadn't. In August 1907, Britain and Russia signed an agreement in St. Petersburg. They did not ask Persia. The Anglo-Russian Convention divided Persian territory into three zones. The north fell under Russian influence, the southeast under British influence. A central strip would nominally be neutral, which in practice meant neither power wanted it, not that Persia controlled it. A country that had just won a constitution discovered in the same year that its sovereignty had been negotiated at a table thousands of miles from Tehran. The parliament, the Majlis, protested, gave speeches, drafted diplomatic notes. Russia responded by sending troops north. In 1911, Russian cannons shelled the Majlis building itself in Tehran. The constitutional experiment was suspended by force. Here is what that revealed. Persia had a constitution, but it had no state. It had a parliament, but no army capable of defending it. It had a territory on the map, but no sovereignty over it. The revolution had created institutions. It had not created power. And power in the world of 1907 meant one very specific thing: the capacity to make other states take you seriously when you said no. Persia did not have that. The question left hanging, the one that would define the next 15 years, was direct and brutal. If the state does not control its own territory, who fills that vacuum? The anatomy of a state that could not hold itself together. To understand why the collapse ran so deep, you need to understand how power was distributed inside Persia and why that distribution made any structural reform nearly impossible. The Shah governed, but he governed through a network of intermediaries, provincial governors who were royal family members or aristocrats bound by personal loyalty, not institutional loyalty. When a governor died or fell from grace, the local structure collapsed with him. There was no civil service career, no technical bureaucracy, no administrative continuity. There were people, and people changed sides. The clerics, the ulama, held parallel power that the state could neither absorb nor ignore. They controlled religious courts, schools, and the collection of religious taxes. In many Persian cities, an influential cleric wielded more daily authority than any representative of the Shah. The constitutional revolution had been possible partly because some clerics supported it, but that support was conditional, negotiable, and could be withdrawn. The finances were the most visible symptom of the disease. Persia had borrowed from Russia to pay debts to Britain, had sold concessions to repay loans. The cycle closed in on itself. In 1910, an American mission led by Morgan Schuster arrived in Tehran, hired by the Persian government to try to reorganize national finances. Within less than a year, Russia demanded his expulsion. Schuster was sent home. The finances remained in chaos. The First World War and the occupation, no one declared. In 1914, Persia declared neutrality. It made no difference. Between 1914 and 1918, Russian troops operated in the north. British troops operated in the south and east. Ottoman troops advanced through the northwest. At one point, 3 foreign armies were on Persian soil simultaneously. A country that had declared neutrality was being used as a battlefield by all sides. Famine set in, crops were destroyed or requisitioned. Estimates suggest that between 1917 and 1919, the combination of poor harvests, economic blockade, and the logistical collapse caused by the war killed between 2 and 3 million Persians in a population of roughly 10 million. There is no monument to this. There is no commemorative date. It is one of the largest demographic catastrophes of the 20th century that almost no one knows. And at the war's end, Britain, now without the Russian counterweight, toppled by the Bolshevik Revolution, attempted to formalize what had informally been true for decades. In 1919, the Anglo-Persian Agreement proposed essentially transforming Persia into a British protectorate, with British advisors controlling finances, the military, and infrastructure. The Majlis refused to ratify it. Internal pressure was intense enough to block the agreement, but refusal solved nothing. Persia had survived the British agreement, it had not survived the collapse, and in a country without an effective army, without stable finances, with armed tribes operating with growing autonomy, and a capital that barely controlled its own surroundings, an implacable logic was at work. Reza Khan and the grammar of the vacuum. Reza Khan did not come from nowhere. He came from the Persian Cossack Brigade, a military force originally created by Russian instructors, which had become, paradoxically, the only relatively cohesive military body Persia possessed. He was not an intellectual, not a revolutionary with political theory. He was an officer who had spent his entire life inside a military institution and had arrived at a conclusion that seemed obvious to anyone watching Persia in 1919. A state without the capacity to enforce its own authority is not a state. It is a name on a map. What Reza Khan represented was not an ideology. It was a functional answer to a question the country had been asking itself for 20 years without being able to answer. Who fills the vacuum? Whoever has discipline, weapons, and the will to use them. There was just one problem. Visible already in 1920, before the coup that was coming, Reza Khan was using the apparatus of the state to build the state, reorganizing the brigade, expanding his control, accumulating loyalties within the army. The builder and the owner were beginning to look more and more like the same person. In February 1921, Reza Khan marched on Tehran. There was no battle, there was no one to fight. The government dissolved. A new cabinet was formed within hours. Reza Khan took command of the armed forces. Shah Ahmad Shah, young, indecisive, who had spent much of his reign traveling through Europe, watched from afar and did nothing. Over the next 4 years, Reza Khan did what no Persian government had managed to do in decades. He built a national army, not a brigade, not a tribal force, not mercenaries paid by foreign concession, an army with conscription, with training, with a chain of command that answered to the central state. Then he used that army to do what was necessary for it to exist. He subjugated the tribes, disarmed tribal leaders, broke the autonomy of provincial governors, centralized tax collection. Each of these steps was a small war, some were large ones. In 1925, the Majlis, the same parliament that had been the symbol of the 1905 constitutional revolution, voted to depose the Qajar Dynasty. Think about that for a moment. The parliament that was born to limit the Shah's power voted to end the monarchy, and then voted to create a new one, with Reza Khan as Shah. The man who had come to power promising to strengthen the institutions of the state had become the institution of the state. Persia had a new ruler, it had an army, it had a bureaucracy under construction, it had borders that the central government could for the first time in a long while defend. What was not clear, what remained as an open wound, was what had survived of Persia inside all of this. The constitution existed on paper, the Majlis continued to meet, but any legislator who opposed Reza Shah quickly discovered that the difference between a parliament with an army in the street and a parliament without one was the difference between an institution and a decoration. What remained of Persia inside Iran? Reza Shah's response to the chaos he had inherited was systematic, accelerated, and authoritarian. Not because he was ideologically committed to authoritarianism as a concept, but because the logic of a state that must prove its existence to avoid being dismembered does not allow for the luxury of gradualness. Ataturk's Turkey was the visible model, a state that had emerged from Ottoman collapse through forced modernization, aggressive secularization, and military centralization. Reza Shah looked toward Ankara and saw a manual. The law shifted from the system of religious courts to a secular civil and penal code based on European models. The veil was progressively restricted in public spaces. Tribal dress was banned in favor of standardized Western attire. The education system was centralized and secularized. Roads were built, not coincidentally, because roads are the physical anatomy of a centralized state. Where there is a road, there is the possibility of taxation, of conscription, of military response, and in 1935, the government notified foreign embassies that the country's official name would be Iran, not Persia, in all international communications. Iran derives from Ariana, the land of the Aryans, a reference to the pre-Islamic Indo-European identity of the Persian people. It was a declaration of national identity, not religious, not dynastic, but ethnic and historical. A way of saying to the world, we are a nation with roots deeper than any dynasty that has governed us, older than any power that tried to divide us. It was not a symbolic gesture, it was an assertion of survival, but the transformation carried a cost buried within its own mechanism. A state built by force to resist force tends to perpetuate force as its political language. The modernization Reza Shah imposed was real, but it was imposed. The institutions he created functioned as long as he sustained them with personal authority. When that authority was removed, as would happen in 1941, when the British and Soviets forced his abdication during the Second World War, what remained would not be a mature state. It would be a state that had learned to obey a man, not a system. The contradictions planted between 1905 and 1935, between modernization and identity, between centralization and pluralism, between a strong state and a society that had fought for representation were not resolved. They were compressed. And compression in physics and in politics is only accumulated energy waiting for a breaking point. That breaking point came in 1979. An empire that could not hold itself together was replaced by a state that held itself together by force. That was not the dream of 1905. The dream of 1905 was a constitution, a parliament, a government bound by law. That dream was real enough to move crowds, to make clerics and merchants march together, to produce one of the first constitutional revolutions in the Islamic world, and it was real enough to be defeated twice, first by Russian cannons, then by the implacable logic of a power vacuum that any disciplined army could fill. What remained of Persia inside Iran is a question Iran still asks itself. Look at any nation today facing external pressure while trying to reform fragile structures. Debating national identity while larger powers negotiate over its territory, producing parliaments and constitutions without having resolved who controls the weapons. The dilemma of 1907 has not aged, it has changed address. The history of Iran between 1905 and 1935 is not a story about the Middle East. It is a story about the price of surviving as a nation in an international system that does not forgive weakness, and about what a people is forced to become when the alternative is to disappear. The question is not whether the transformation was just. The question is whether there was another way, and that is a question that, to this day, has no easy answer. This is Saul's Stories, examining the decisive moments that reshaped nations and shaped world history itself. Let us know in the comments which story you'd like to see on the channel. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like. It really helps us a lot. And speaking of Iran, if you want to understand how the state born in this period shaped the revolution of 1979 and the Iran the world faces today, let us know in the comments. This chapter is not over. The past you witnessed today is still under construction.
This agreement is a betrayal!
No to this agreement!